Revit is a powerful tool, but did you know that mastering keyboard shortcuts can make your work faster and smarter? In this video, I'll show you how to access, customize, and optimize your Revit shortcuts so you can boost efficiency and spend less time clicking through menus. Revit comes with predefined keyboard shortcuts to help you quickly access tools. If you've ever used TR for trim extend to corner or DI for aligned dimensions, you're already using them. But what if we could customize shortcuts to match your workflows? That's what we'll cover today. To customize your shortcuts, you need to navigate to the keyboard shortcuts menu. There is actually, in fact, a keyboard shortcut for that, and that is KS for keyboard shortcuts. And if you can't remember that, another way, obviously I'm trying to get you away from the menus, but if you are still in a process of learning keyboard shortcuts, you can go to find it under View, and then User Interface, and then Keyboard Shortcuts. One thing to note is that if there is any button that you use frequently, Revit shows you in parentheses next to each command the shortcut that is assigned to it. So if you haven't created any custom shortcuts, the majority of what you'll see is the out-of-the-box shortcuts. So for example, keyboard shortcuts is KS, as you can see there. There's no browser organization. If I look at properties here, it's PP. If we go over to the architecture tab and hover over something like walls, right? There's WA, DR for doors, WN for windows, and so on. Now, let's talk about customization. I'm going to go over back to the keyboard shortcuts dialog. And maybe you use certain tools more than others and want to reassign a shortcut or create a new one. So once you're in here, you can simply search for that tool. So for example, if you frequently create PDFs, which we all do, right? Let's look for a PDF. There is an option for linking, importing, and then you'll see here that there's two PDF commands. There's one from the print menu, and then there's one for the export. Side topic, but I highly recommend using the one that's the export. That is a built-in PDF exporter that comes with Revit. I think starting with Revit 23 or 24, maybe even 22, it was already available. But you can see here I've assigned it a custom shortcut of PD. If you are interested in the custom shortcuts that I am showing, you can download those from bimdad.com. There'll be a link in the description. And once you have a custom set of shortcuts, if you want to save them out, you can do that from the keyboard shortcuts dialog. You can go down here to export, click on that, and that will export out a XML file that you can save out. Now, if you're importing a set of custom shortcuts, you can go to import and simply navigate to where that file is saved, typically probably in your downloads, unless you've saved it somewhere for safekeeping. Keep in mind that if you work in Revit and you customize your shortcuts more, you can save those out again, overwrite the file that exists, or give it a date or something that represents, an update to that file if you prefer to preserve the original. There's also some instances where, if you're working across different versions of Revit, you may want to save, distinct versions. I haven't had any issues with taking a keyboard shortcuts file that was meant for Revit 25 and bringing it into Revit 22 or anything like that. All it is not bringing in the shortcuts that aren't available. So just keep that in mind. If you want to distinguish Revit versions, you can do that, but it shouldn't have any negative effects on the file functioning for a Revit version. A good tip for establishing your shortcuts is to keep them intuitive. So use the letters that remind you of the tool. For example, RR for rotate or MM for move. So keep with that in mind though, right? If I search for move, it's already assigned MV, which is pretty easy to remember, right? Move, MV. Some people do prefer MM, but what happens is, right, if I try to assign MM to this, I'm going to get an error because MM is a default shortcut for the mirror tool, specifically the one where you can pick the axes as something that's already drawn in the model. So if you do get that, you can remove it from the MM, or You are allowed to have duplicates, but I don't recommend it. Just make sure that you have unique shortcuts for each thing. Otherwise, you might get in trouble trying to do one thing and a different thing happens. But one thing that I always recommend is try not to change the out of the box shortcuts. Best practice that I always say is add new shortcuts, but don't remove the out of the box shortcuts. The reason for that is if you have a Revit question and somebody comes over to assist you, it's going to be a fun conversation every time they try to use a shortcut and they can't. It happens more often than not, and I always try to get early in with users to make sure that they don't do that. But if you happen to have done that already, there are ways to reset it. Within Revit shortcuts, there are also things that are called reserved keys. So for example, some people would love to change the sync button. Some people, and I know, have tried to do Control S, for example, right? I just tried entering Control S and it says the shortcut you entered is reserved. That means that these particular combination of keys are always reserved for essential Windows functions, right? Control Z is always going to be undo. Control S is always going to be save. So if you're unsure whether a key is available, try assigning it in Revit. If it's reserved, Revit won't let you override it. You can see here one thing that I did for myself is I gave myself the Shift S for synchronize with modify settings. That's one of my pet peeves here, is that I often see people using synchronize now, and that's fine, it works, but synchronize and modify settings gives you an additional box or dialog that will allow you to run model health related things like compact, and it also allows you to fully relinquish ownership of worksets without having to hit relinquish all. Now there's always going to be some shortcuts that are really useful. Some of the good navigation and view related ones are, for example, if you have multiple windows or sheets open, a good one to know is WT. Oops, I clicked in the middle of that. But if you do WT, that tiles your windows. Something that people, and this is not related to shortcuts, but something that people don't realize is you can also drag these around if you wanted to, just like, okay, A101 and 102 are going to sit together here. I'm going to put those two down here. You can do that. WT works. So like, for example, if I have this one active and I hit WT, it goes to the top here. And if I have A101 active and I hit WT, that becomes the top one here. So it always goes to the top left or the left side if you only have 3 views open, and you can kind of cycle through that. A shortcut that I thought was out of the box but is actually custom to me is TW, the inverse, or at least I've seen it missing in some people's setups. But TW brings things back to tabs. So WT will tile your windows and TW will bring things back. And then if I tile these windows again and I want them all to zoom, right, zoom to fit, I'm going to do a ZA, right? That's going to reset all my views and do zoom extent on all my views. Now, something that can happen too is you may only want certain ones to be zoomed out or zoomed in, right? If I only want my top one here, I can do ZE instead, and that's a zoom extent in the view that I have active, as opposed to ZA, which is all of them. And then you have the VP, which is the view property. So you can see the properties went away over here. That's also the shortcut for that's also PP, right? If I do double P, then it goes away and comes back depending on what you need. And then if we move over to annotation and drafting, right, a really useful one is obviously you have DI for dimensioning. If I go into the view and try to dimension DI, right, there it is. DL, detail lines, super useful to have. And then TG for tagging, right, that's the tag by category. I don't have anything to tag in here, but if I did, you can see that I'm in the process of placing a tag up here. And obviously for things like modeling, we have, if I have a couple of walls, right, and I wanted trim to corner, right, TR is this. That's a really useful one. And then CO for copy. Create similar is a really good one, right? So if you see here, I'll put this as a 30-foot high wall, and these are all 20. If I select this wall and I hit create similar, I'm making a wall that is 20 feet. tall. And if I select this one and hit CS for create similar, the settings here are set up at 30 feet. So create similar is a really powerful one in terms of modeling quickly, especially if you're doing like existing conditions where you're like referencing certain wall types in a project. That's always a really quick one to use, especially with the matching heights and other instance properties. And then you have things like AL for align, right? So if I wanted to align the end of these walls together, there you go. Another one, rotate RO, right? So I hit RO, so I enabled the shortcut before I selected something. So now I have to select something, hit the spacebar to confirm selection, and now I'm in the process of rotating. If I happened to have selected something before hitting RO, you can see that it skips the step of having to hit the spacebar to confirm my selection. So there you go. I'm gonna just type in 90, enter, rotated, and then you have the mirror on axes function, right? So if I have this wall and I wanted to mirror it along the center of this one, there you go. Now that becomes equally spaced because it's mirrored on this same wall. There's a couple of custom shortcuts in here that are really useful. So obviously TR is trim extend to corner. I like to set up TT as trim extend, a single element, right? So that way if I wanted to extend that wall, I just hit TT and done. And then if I had multiple walls, TM is another one that I like to set up, right, for trim extend multiple. So then I can select something like this and then click all the walls I need to trim extend there. Again, it's the little shortcuts, right, that help you save time, because if you weren't on the modify tab, right, and you were over in architecture, then you now have to either dig for this tab. If you have a ton of add-ins, the modify tab kind of like goes to the end, right, and you're missing it half the time. So having the shortcuts are really going to save you time in finding the tools, and it really saves, it's seconds, right? But all those seconds add up over the course of days and years, right? You're not just using Revit once and that's it. You're using it, 24/7 almost, I'm guessing. So it's a really powerful thing to save even the smallest amount of time. One of the last things here is if you ever want to reset all the shortcuts back to defaults, it actually doesn't happen within Revit. You'd have to navigate out to File Explorer, and then this is the path that you're going to want to follow. So it's your user path. You can also use something like this, right? It's the app data folder for yourself, Autodesk, Revit, and then it's going to be the Revit version that you are using, right? So if I navigate to this, that's what the path looks like, if you're just navigating it. And then what you need to do is basically just remove or delete this keyboard shortcuts XML file, and then that should reset all your Revit shortcuts. Just keep in mind that cannot be undone. So if you do decide to do this, probably a good idea to do a quick export of the shortcuts prior to deleting this and resetting back to defaults. And that's a wrap on Revit shortcuts. Remember, the more you use them, the faster you'll work. Start by memorizing just a few and build up over time. If you found this useful, like and subscribe for more Revit tips. Let me know in the comments what's your favorite shortcut. If you're interested in grabbing a copy of the free shortcuts or custom shortcuts that I mentioned throughout the video, feel free to go over to bimdad.com. On their resources, we have a growing list of resources. Keep in mind, this is still growing. There's not a whole lot in here yet. But if you go over to checklists and cheat sheets, there is a series of Revit shortcuts here. There is a free printable periodic table of Revit shortcuts that highlights some of the custom ones that I mentioned during the video. You can also download the XML file here. And if you are interested and want to have these Revit shortcuts at your fingertips, you can navigate over to the Shopar Merc or the Marketplace. And I am offering it as a desk mat here. It's both available in dark mode as well as light mode, depending on your style.